Hi, good evening, and welcome to today's episode of Boqer School of Government. Today is our 14th class, and we are considering the topic, by what powers do kings rule? You do remember that at Boqer School, our emphasis is on drawing out biblical principles, biblical concepts to apply it in our modern day governance systems, to apply it in our modern day political systems, to apply it in our modern day societal issues. And by so doing, we draw out concepts that can help us in our daily living. I've said times without number that is actually a hallmark of incivility. That's the way I use it. Or in some cases, inhumility for people to have, for instance, challenges and to think that they are the first set of people to experience those challenges. And that's what I usually do, that when I have a problem, I begin to research who do I know that has had these problems before? Who do I know has encountered this challenge? Who do I know? Where can I find people who have encountered these challenges before now? And where I find those people, what were the challenges they faced? How did they manage it? What were the mistakes they made? What were the decisions they take? And those are some of the things we look for when we read the Bible. For instance, the challenges facing us in our individual lives, in our businesses, in our governance spheres. Might we find things in the scriptures? Might we find things in ancient texts that might help us understand our societies better? By what powers do kings rule? By what powers do kings rule? And I want to share our anchor scripture, Acts chapter 4, verse 7. I'm reading from New King James Version. And when they had set them in the midst, they asked, by what power or by what name have you done this? Acts chapter 4, verse 7, New King James Version. And when they had set them in the midst, they asked, by what power or by what name have you done this? And so the scripture is talking about the Acts of Apostles, Peter, when they met someone at the beautiful gate who was lame from birth, and they were accosted. They wanted to get alms from them, and they said to them, silver and gold have I not. You know the story. And then eventually they said, by what I have I will give you. In the name of Jesus, rise up and walk. And after that, they began to preach the gospel and all of those things. And when the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, the keepers of the law, the keepers of the temple, accosted them to ask, by what powers do you do these things? And you also remember that Jesus was accosted with that same question. When he was going about preaching, casting out, they asked him, by what powers do you do these things? Because it is their fundamental understanding that there are certain things you cannot do without being empowered. That there are some results one cannot achieve without being empowered. There are certain kinds of good one cannot do without being empowered. And there are certain kinds of bad one can also not do without being empowered. For instance, the Bible says, and Satan entered Judas Iscariot. And so for Judas Iscariot to even betray his master Jesus, the devil has to enter into him. And then the second time you will also see this was in the days of the early apostles, when Ananias and Sapphira sold their land. And when they brought half of the money or part of the money and kept back part of it to the apostles' feet. And when they had asked him, is this all? He said, yes, this is all. And he said to him, why has devil entered you to lie to the Holy Ghost? So you begin to quickly see that there are some things someone cannot do unaided. There are a lot of things people can do on their own, and we'll find out very, very quickly. But there are some kind of results you can't achieve without help. And so those were the kind of results that the apostles achieved in Acts chapter 4. And then they had to ask, by what powers do you do these things? Those were the kind of results Jesus Christ himself achieved, and people began to ask, by what powers is he doing these things? Some even accused him of having Beelzebub, the king of demons, because they felt, look, this is no longer an ordinary result. And we're asking the question today, by what powers do kings rule? The president you have in America, by what powers does he rule? The president you have in Nigeria, by what powers? Those are the questions we want to ask. And then we will take detours to try to lay foundations. And after laying the foundations, we will now try to build upon those body of knowledge. And it's expected that by the end of the class, you have a fair understanding of the political underplay and then the powers that kings rule from. By what powers do kings rule? The second scripture I would love to go to is the interaction between Jesus Christ and his disciples. I think that interaction could be found in Matthew chapter 16. And so I want to start from verse 13. So when Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And they said, some say that thou art John the Baptist. Some says Elias, others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. And he said unto them, but whom say ye that I am? And Simon Peter answered and said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered and said unto him, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood had not revealed it unto thee. So if you mark your scriptures, mark the first point, flesh and blood. And Jesus answered, verse 17, Matthew 16:17. And Jesus answered and said unto him, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed this unto you. So mark flesh and blood. But my Father which is in heaven, then also mark my Father which is in heaven. Number 2. Let's continue. And I say unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. And whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Then charged he his disciples that they should tell no man that he, Jesus, was the Christ. From that time forth, Jesus began to show unto his disciples how that he must go unto Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and the chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised again the third day. Then Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. But he turned and said unto Peter, get thee behind me, Satan. So if you're marking your scriptures, mark Satan. Number 3. But he turned and said unto Peter, get thee behind me, Satan. So mark Satan. So if you're marking your scriptures, number 1, flesh and blood. Number 2, Father in heaven. Number 3, Satan. Thou art an offense unto me, for thou savourest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. So if you marked these 3 things, number 1 is flesh and blood. Number 2 is Father in heaven. And number 3 is Satan. Number 1 is flesh and blood, Father in heaven, and Satan. And these are the 3 sources of inspiration. There are 3 sources of inspiration available to every man that is on earth. And at every given day, man interacts with these 3 sources of inspiration. So man interacts with first flesh and blood. And flesh and blood can reveal things. You know, many people think that there are 2 sources of inspiration. There are actually 3. And I will use sciences to show you that there are 3 sources of inspiration. Because although the authority of the scripture is strong enough to convince, alright, But we are now using the authority of scripture backed up by sciences to show that there are three sources. Okay, maybe we can prove one of them. The other two you have to believe at that metaphysical level. Flesh and blood can reveal things. People can know things by their flesh and by their blood. And the flesh and blood is marked by animal life for man. You can even further reduce it down. So we'll get into the reduction of that flesh and blood. An animal man can know things with his mind, with his mental capacity, with his senses. And he knows those things to the degree that he has developed those senses. So someone can acquire a PhD and he can know things by the virtue of PhD he has acquired. Someone can go to school and he can know things. Those schooling, the books he read can reveal things to him. Someone can actually develop his senses. But then, because we want to make distinctions, let us reduce it to animal lives. Animals know things. Ever wondered how ants still find a way to maintain their straight line? Ants. There is a sense they have. They have knowledge that helps them to survive their environment. Even housefly, mosquito, insects, when you want to kill them, they perch around. They do all manner of things to avoid being killed. They know how to mate, how to replicate their kind. They know how to eat. They know when to fly and when to stay. They sense danger and they have ability to evade and to avoid danger, despite the fact that they are animals. So flesh and blood can reveal things. Even, when you watched all these science documentaries, you see even toads. I saw one fascinating documentary. Even toads, when they are inside the body of water, all right, and then maybe a snake wants to attack it, it releases poison inside the body of water. That poison it released, that animal that wants to attack it cannot come into that poison, because that poisonous substance has encircled him and the water. And for him, that release of poisonous substance becomes a survival mechanism. And so every of those animals have embedded in them survival mechanisms, instincts, things that tell them when to be hungry, how to mate, how to procreate, how to avoid danger, how to get their food, whatever their food is, how to break down those foods. So encoded in them, encoded in animal life is knowledge. And that knowledge can be broken down to the molecular level. That knowledge can be broken down to the cellular level. That knowledge can be broken down even further down. Now you have proton, but you have even further down breaking down of those components. So embedded in the house, in the life of the mosquito, is the ability to know. Encoded in the life of the housefly is the ability to know. Encoded in the life of the lion is the ability to hunt. And encoded even in the life of that lion is the ability to produce its kind. So there is a wiring, there is a body of knowledge that allows that lion to function. There is a body of knowledge that allows houseflies to function. There is a body of knowledge that allows any animal at all to function. And in man, that knowledge exists. So man can know by the function of his flesh and blood. There is also a plant life. There is also plant life. Encoded in every plant is the ability to know they have functions. That's why you will see that their metabolism is quite different. The way they convert this solar energy to food, the way they convert solar energy, they convert it, they store food. So plants know things. They have embedded in them certain sequences that control their operations. That even when you deny them direct access to sun, you sometimes see trees start bending away from the source of blockade to start meeting the sun. So they know how to adapt. Trees know how to adapt. There are some trees that can adapt well in scarcity. So they know when there is water, and so they will limit their intake of water so that they don't take too much. They also know how to limit their exposure during the dry season so that they don't lose much water. They also know how to open up their capillaries so that they can receive much water. Any at all moisture you see in the environment, they know how to trap those moisture. So trees and plants have embedded in them survival mechanisms that help them survive. That is why some plants that survive in tropical regions may find it difficult to thrive in temperate regions, because embedded in them is the knowledge to survive in tropical regions, whereas they don't have that embedded knowledge to survive in temperate regions. So even at that plant life, there is knowledge. If you step it down, you get to chemical life. There is also knowledge in the chemical life. And that's why water will remain H2O consistent. And that's why if you try to mix water with oil, it will still find the viscosity is different. That's why iron produces iron. And anytime you expose iron to oxygen or something, if you expose iron to a particular level of exposure, it will rust. Because encoded in it is the life of iron. And it must function and carry out the properties of iron. If it is sodium, it will have the capacity to carry out the life of sodium. That is why it can mix with chlorine to form sodium chloride at a particular temperature and a particular pressure too. So if you step down from animal life, you will get to plant life. If you step down from plant life, you will get to chemical life. Even microorganisms know, they have knowledge. So flesh and blood can reveal things to people. Man, unlike trees, can access a higher level of knowledge. Man, unlike lions, can access higher level of knowledge. Because whereas his flesh and blood can reveal things to him, his flesh and blood, especially when it comes to basic survival, instinctive things. How do you know the hallmark of flesh and blood? When you get into a city you've not been before, if you have some kind of instinct, you may be able to say, oh no, it's not the right turn, it's the left. I should take the left. Now, this knowledge is not from you because you don't know the city. Some people call it intuition, some people call it sixth sense, some people call it instinct. Well, those are there. But eventually when you stay in that city for so long, that you now know the bends, the turns everywhere. When you are coming back from work and you are going to your house, you practically have the map of the city in your brain. At that time, flesh and blood can help you navigate. You don't need extra revelation to know the way to your house. Flesh and blood can do that for you. Encoded in the life of a baby is survival instincts. That's why once they come out, they start looking for what to eat, what breast to suck. It's encoded in their DNA. They know. They know when their diapers is wet. They know. And every man has access to flesh and blood. And the thing with flesh and blood is that it can profit you immensely. Especially a developed flesh and blood. There are people who have so trained their flesh and blood that they are expert accountants, and with their flesh and blood, they can make a mess of any accounting situation. People have so trained their flesh and blood that they are Formula 1 drivers. When it comes to that particular area of training, they can function so well. So flesh and blood can reveal things. But then Jesus said to him, flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven. So Father in heaven can reveal things. And so there are things you can know, but you don't know this at the flesh and blood level. Because by human logic, you are not supposed to know this. By human reasoning, now your PhD cannot grant you this kind of access. Your training, your nurture cannot grant you this kind of access. But by a special privilege, and everybody on earth knows things from God, including people who claim that there is no God. Every creature of God retains the signature of God, and every child of God can hear God. Whether they are Muslims, whether they hear the living God. Every creation, they hear God. Now they may not know that who they hear is God. Depending on the person's level of development, they can call it instinct. They can call it something told me. I felt something. Now, at the level when it starts out, you can keep calling it something because you don't have relationship with that something. Eventually, if you know more, you will know that it is not something, that it is someone. But there are some people who stop at the level of something. So Father in heaven can reveal things to you. There are packets of inspiration. The Bible says that it is God who gives you the ability both to will and to do of his good pleasure. And so sometimes those things you call your dreams, my goals, my motivation, my aspiration, those are usually embedded in you by someone transcendent. Of course, you can get your inspiration from the TV, you can get inspiration from social media, you can get, there are some people, their career choice was from social media. Because many Christians don't know how to function in that God realm, that they know how to function in their flesh and blood. And that's why Christians make voting decisions based on the things they hear on television. Because in many of the instances, they have not developed their God nature to hear from God. But every Christian hears from God. The Bible says, for the men clearly know him. I think it's in Romans. Because the invisible attributes of God are clearly seen and made manifest through the things that we are created. But everyone hears God. Now, some people call it instinct. Because, again, another scripture says that he has written the law in their hearts. Every man knows the basic good and evil. At that basic level, that knowledge of good and evil is God in their hearts. Now, whether or not they do it is a different question. And so every man can hear God. Every man can hear God. Now, many people can choose to shut him out completely, may be totally ignorant. Many people may have heard him and they believe, oh, it's my instinct, it's my sixth sense, it is the universe, it is, well, there are several names. But then, immediately, Jesus had told Peter, flesh and blood did not reveal this. My Father in heaven revealed this to you. 6 or 4 verses after, Peter began to broadcast from a different frequency. That Jesus has to look at him and say to him, get thee behind me, Satan. Because now, it is no longer Peter speaking. It is no longer God speaking. In fact, it would have been better for Peter that his flesh and blood was speaking. But now it was no longer his flesh and blood. There was now another entity speaking through him that Jesus has to rebuke. For flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, my Father in heaven. And so it is possible for you, in one moment, you take a decision by flesh and blood. The next 2 minutes, you take decision by heavenly revelation. The next 3 minutes, Satan has inspired something. And so these are the 3 sources of inspiration. Animal form of life is a very low form of life. Animal form of life. It's a low form of life, but it's an important form of life. It's an intelligent form of life. Intelligent. It can know things. In fact, it can be trained to know things. So flesh and blood can know things. Flesh and blood can reveal things. Even plant life, I've explained, has encoded wisdom. But there is a superior wisdom to that, which is the knowledge of God. And there is also a destructive wisdom, And that destructive wisdom is superior to the animal life, and it can come from Satan. And so within this framework, we will now try to answer the basic questions that we're trying to answer this evening. By what powers do kings rule? Remember where we started. There are some things you cannot do unaided. No, you can't do them except you are helped. There are some things you can't know unless you are helped. There are some powers you can't acquire except you are helped. And many times I ask myself, when someone becomes so powerful to make himself or to subjugate, or maybe let's find a more politically tenable word, when someone acquires the capacity in a nation of 220 million people to force himself to become their leader, how did he do that? Because at some point it will be clear to you that flesh and blood has ceased. There are some, you will know where your flesh and blood will stop. Flesh and blood, very important, but limited. But that's not even the basic question we're asking today. We're asking, by what powers do kings rule? So when they write economic policies, where did they get that inspiration? That's what we're looking for. When governments implement health policies, like you undoubtedly have people designing health policies at the World Health Organization, where did they get the inspiration from? Before Moses can say these are the laws, he must have met someone who gave him laws. Without meeting that someone, there are no laws. And so when your government officials wake up in the morning to implement public policies, they met someone. And the question is, who? Where did they get this inspiration? This idea of executing this policy, where did it come from? Where is this health policy coming from that all of us must be mandated? Do you guys know that in France a law has been passed that makes it outrightly illegal for you to provide counter information to any of the government prescribed health tips? So it was not enough for them to mark any dissenting voice, anybody that dissents with COVID-19. Facebook will start marking you as a conspiracy theorist. If they can't suppress your account, they provide warnings. And when they can't censor that, today it is no longer enough for them to censor. It is now that nation states are moving to make it outrightly illegal that when the government says everybody must take this vaccine, you can't come out to say otherwise. The law is now passed in France. It was passed less than 3 weeks ago. So when World Health Organization is designing their economic, their health policy, their COVID-19 policy, their pandemic policy, their response to viral outbreak, where did they get those things? And I have found out, dear brothers, that in many of the instances, it is not flesh and blood. I would have so loved that it is flesh and blood. Unfortunately. So when your presidents prescribe economic policies that only lead to poverty, you ask yourself, where did they get this from? How did it enter their minds? Because while Peter was there, Peter did not know that he was just a mere instrument. He was subject to the whims and caprices of his flesh and blood. He was subject to the transmission of God the Father. He was also like a transistor radio. Any frequency he tunes into can broadcast through him. If he tunes to 91.5 FM, he will be broadcasting from 91.5 FM. If he tunes to 84.6, he will be broadcasting from there. If he switches to terrestrial, he will be broadcasting from there. And so, where do these people get their inspiration? These economic models we are trying out in many countries in Africa, where do we get them from? By what powers do kings rule? So there are two ways to look at it. What is the power that set them up? How did they acquire this capacity that they can put 220 million people, in the case of Nigeria, into subjection, and they can exert their influence over nations? How did they acquire that capacity? They were asking the apostles, by what powers do you do these things? Because this one is no longer, maybe we go the same secondary school. We graduated with the same grade. We got employed, but this one is no longer, there is something. By what powers? And that's what we're trying to find out. By what powers do kings rule? Before men can set up economic policies, health policies, education policies, COVID-19 policies, gay rights movement, even before they can multiply prosperity, they usually get inspiration. And I've told you that inspiration can come from either of the three sources. And one person can function from the three without knowing. But there is a fundamental question I wanted to answer. And I wrote it here. The processes people go through before they acquire political power. I wanted to speak briefly on that, and then we can wrap up and maybe take questions. How do men become presidents? Have you thought of it? What does Wenonah need to do to become the president of America? What does Livingstone need to do to become the governor of Enugu State? The person who is currently the governor, what did he do to get there? And in my research, I have found out that there is usually a process. It can differ from city to city. It can differ from county to county. It can differ from continent to continent. It can differ from country to country. But in many of the instances, they retain the same similarities. One of the striking similarities is that it's usually a long and tortuous process. Now, the length varies from country to country. So, for instance, the learning curve is steep in Nigeria now, that it takes an average of 30 years of plotting to get a reasonable shot at the presidency of Nigeria. At least the minimum is 30 years. When Nigeria got its independence newly, you had very newly commissioned officers. So yes, they were in their 20s and in their 30s, and they could aspire to become presidents. Today, the kind of network in human resources you need, the kind of network in financial engineering you need, not just having money, but having the capacity to deploy your money in 36 states at the same time. Not just having money, but the capacity to deploy your money to 774 local governments. Not just having money, but the capacity to deploy your money in all the wards. Not just having money, but the capacity to deploy it in many of the polling units. And so I saw what happened in Lagos during the last governorship election. I was in the situation room. And it dawned on me that Nigeria is almost gone. At some point, policemen became tired. It was overwhelming. Did you guys know that in Lagos State, the incumbent administration had the capacity to snatch ballot boxes at any polling unit? Now there were more than 6,000 polling units in Lagos State. But they had capacity to produce thugs per polling unit. And because of the kind of security architecture they had, you can't have cross-border thugs. So thugs hardly move from polling units to polling units. They are localized. So in every vicinity, they had the capacity to mobilize their own thugs. So even the science of snatching ballot papers, you have to tweak it well that you now have capacity to have network of thugs and cultists. In many other climes, it may not be that way. You may have network of lobbyists, network of financial engineers, network of super PACs, network of donors. Yeah, you need that in many African states, but you have to have those networks. And it takes time. But that is not even the process. There are deeper processes that the processes of becoming a president for anybody is a mind-bending process. And it is not just for your leaders in Africa. Many people who end up becoming presidents become first damaged because they became the president. And anybody who will ever become something will have to go through a life-transforming process. If God in heaven is to make David a president, he will take him through processes to make him. And that by the time he has made this one a king, he has lost a lot of things. The same with Joseph. From his father's house, you saw the many processes, the betrayals, the punishments, the double betrayals. Eventually, when he became a prime minister, you will see the evidence of what God had done in his life. That when he met his brothers, he was supposed to be angry with his brothers, but he was the one comforting them, saying, "For the Lord sent me ahead of you." So through that prison, through everything he went through, the Lord was still there to take a hold of his life, his heart. That this man can suffer hurt and betrayal, yet get to power with. And that is the route that damages people. That before people can get into power, there are many experiences, the many betrayals, the many things they had to go through, the many amount of sleepless nights, dealings, backroom, the amount of things, treacherous things they had to do. That in many of those instances, sorry for that break in transmission. That in many of those instances, that is a life-transforming process. It can transform you positively, but for many people who go through that without being helped, it transforms them negatively. That this person is now in power, but has been damaged before they gave him power. And so now, because he has been damaged, he can now become an instrument to damage people. And that is why your presidents can take decisions. They see people dying daily. People cannot afford to eat, but it doesn't affect them. Something has died in them. For someone to begin to kill, something was dying in a man before he can kill. A man needs to be in pain before he can inflict pain. And so the processes of making your leaders in the worldly dispensation is a process that puts men through kind of unbearable pain, and through that damages them. Through circumstances, through betrayals, that they will start out good. I want to do good for the people. But if their hearts are not helped, the thing that they will go through called election, called campaigning, the many betrayals they will meet on the way, the many resources they have to part with, the many sleepless nights, that when they eventually become, they are damaged, nearly irreparably damaged. And so now they can become vessels that can transmit. And so they can now become dancers, dancing to a different tune. In summary, it is now clear to us that the men and women making the policies of Nigeria are not hearing God. I can tell you for free. The guys writing your economic policies, it's not from flesh and blood, I can tell you. The guys writing our health policies, they don't hear God, and it's a terrible thing. The people writing our laws, they don't hear God. It's a terrible thing. Our lawmakers, they are passing new laws every day. You need to ask yourself, what do these people hear before they can write their laws? Let me give you guys scriptures. Acts chapter 4, 8 to 10. Then Peter, filled with the Holy Spirit, said to them. You also see it. Stephen, being filled with the Holy Ghost, said to them. You also see Jesus, being filled with the Holy Ghost, was moving about. Your lawmakers are filled with wine. Your lawmakers are filled with substances. Your lawmakers are filled with licentious lifestyle. And when they have taken a proper dose of their favorite substance, they can now write laws clearly. I remember in our school days, one guy was telling me, oh, you look intelligent. You look very intelligent. You're kind of people your drugs will do. You're very smart. I mean, you know how smart you are now. If you now add a little dose of inspiration, like when you want to read, you just smoke. And then the reading will now come out fine. Acts chapter 4, 13. Now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated, so they perceived that this one is no longer flesh and blood, they marveled and they realized that they had been with Jesus. We need to, brothers and sisters, need to stop complaining about Nigeria. We need to stop complaining about Africa. No matter what you do, if ungodly men continue to write laws using ungodly inspiration, the answer is already set in stone. If ungodly men continue to write education policies, they will start teaching our kids pornography, all in the name of tolerance. I saw essays, books for some people in the United States. I can't remember the classes they were in or the grade. They were asking them, what's the favorite part of the house where you love touching yourself? By that they mean masturbation. So by now they have fully taught them how to please themselves. But now they are now asking them, what is the favorite part of the house where you like doing it? That's a standard curricula in today's America. The people who are writing your societal policies are telling you it's okay to decide. You don't have the right to decide for your children. They can choose to identify as a he, as a she, as a goat, as a mama. They can choose to, it's a freedom of choice. The people who are creating these liberties, they are not filled with the Holy Ghost. And regardless of what you do, they can only replicate what they are filled with. A bitter person can only replicate to the tune of his infilling of bitterness. A damaged man can only replicate to the tune of his being damaged. A wayward person writing laws can only write wayward laws. I am saying all this to tell you guys that we need to be in government. That's the honest truth. Our speaking in tongues cannot end in the church. Our being pious, you hear God, but you hear him for yourself. No, we need to hear him for the society. Did you know that Jesus was a lawmaker? He was telling them, Moses said to you this, that you will not commit adultery. I say to you, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully, that's Electoral Act amendment. That is actually an amendment to an existing law. He was updating the laws. So because there are some laws that are cast on stone, but men evolve over time. For instance, there was no need for God to give Moses laws governing aviation, because men had not, as at that time, discovered the need to fly. So there was no need regulating an industry that does not exist. So God couldn't have started telling them about traffic lights. God couldn't have started telling them about the need to regulate their activities. God couldn't have started telling them about how to regulate the ocean economy, marine economy. God couldn't have told them how to regulate the environment, because they were not in a place where he can tell them that. And that is why, as the society keeps evolving, even as we speak, man is at the elementary stage of exploring his environment. If Christ tarries to come, this is our iPhone 15. Our grandchildren will look at it, and our iPhone 15 we're killing for. Our grandchildren will look at it and wonder what kind of a caveman were these. If you have seen old pictures of your parents, those things you see them wearing and you were just like, what kind of life is this? It was in vogue then. The technologies they had then, the transistor radio, when men discovered transistor radio, oh boy, it was as if the world was, let the world end now, because this is the end of it all. The same thing when they discovered television, same thing when they discovered color television. I can tell you for free, we have not scratched 1% of the Earth's resources. Man is even at the basic exploratory phase of the planets. We've only landed in the moon. Nobody has gone to the sun. And don't say nobody can reach there. Eventually, if we keep staying here, people may acquire the capacity to go there. Men have not reached. There are certain planets we've not gone to. There are certain under the water. There is a lot that is yet to be discovered. Even the management of the earth, the combination of metals, the combination of earth's resources, how to combine them to produce this and that. We are still at it. So as you begin to evolve in knowledge, the laws need to be evolving. But then that is why you have lawmakers. But then the thing is this, that as the law evolves to meet up with the society, the fundamentals don't change. So you will never see the laws change on the fundamentals. But whenever you have men who are inspired differently to write laws, they will now, all in the guise of meeting up with the trends, will begin to adjust the fundamentals. No, a man will remain a man, whether they are in the wilderness in Egypt or they are in the 23rd century, if we ever get to that. Those ones don't change. So even if you keep updating the laws, the precepts are there, unchanging. You can touch up the additionals. You can regulate. Okay, now we have not. There may be need to regulate air travel now because it's an in thing. 500 years ago, your lawmakers had no need debating air travel. No. But now they have to debate it. But at every stage of debate, you must ask the questions, where are they getting their inspiration from? The people who are sitting at the school boards, who are responsible for choosing the textbooks for our school children, where do they get the inspiration from? Where do your teachers get inspiration from? Where do your music artists get their inspiration from? So those of us who know this, who have the technique of hearing God, must find ways to navigate ourselves into places where we can hear God for the nation. There are people who hear the devil for the nation. They download economic policies that lead to penury. They download health policies that lead to penury. They download technological policies that lead men away from God. And so those of us who know this must begin to fight and get into that place, because we know that there is a power that sustains rulership. Your judges don't wake up and interpret laws. There is usually something that helps them to interpret. They may not know it at a conscious level. And this is where it gets tricky. Maybe this is the last point. Spirits, especially when they are from the other side, are very deceptive in nature. I've said in one of our classes that there are spirits whose name is there is no God. And these spirits, before they encounter you, you need to be a proud person. And so there are people, for instance, in Africa, they worship God, they worship this, they worship that, and it's acceptable for them to worship those. But there are people, when the spirits encounter them, the spirit will tell them, look, my name is there is no God. And they will start running around, shouting on television, arguing every place. But whatever they are doing is in worship to that spirit who has told them that there is no God. So when they shout, there is no God, they are shouting and they are investing their energy. They are proving to you, they are attacking you is actually in worship to a deity that has convinced them that its name is there is no God. So this deity, if you want to, so you don't have the functional humility to accept the existence of God. So they can meet you and tell you there is no God. And that's your belief. And the person, now, for you to see, the person does not just believe that there is no God and sit down. The person must do something to worship that there is no God he worships. And so that is the way. Some people receive packets of inspiration. They just receive flashes of economic policies. They don't know where it came from because they are not conscious enough to know where it came from. Peter was not conscious to know that he had started speaking from the devil. So many politicians are not active devil worshippers. They're actually good men, like you and I. But they can hear from the devil. Because this man, just a few minutes ago, was speaking directly from God the Father. Eventually, he was speaking from the other source. But there are men who have made up their minds. They know who is speaking to them. And they end up, because of what it can profit them, it gives them power, it gives them money, it gives them resources, it gives them, because it usually satisfies their lust. And therefore, they keep piping out economic policies, piping out education policies, piping out drugs, piping out vaccines, piping out health policies, piping out all of those other things. And the more they broadcast from that frequency, the more your society takes the shape of the spirits. Your society will always look like the sources of inspiration of your leaders. So if your leaders are inspired people towards violence, the society will be violent. If the society starts receiving inspiration from spirits that broadcast peace, there will be peace in the land. If your leaders start broadcasting from the frequency of scarcity, something will push them to remove subsidy without replacement. Something will push them to deregulate environments where they should not be. Something will just, it will appear nice to them. And in their own, they think that they are implementing textbook economics. But that obstinacy, that the spirit to will and to do, the Bible says that it is God who supplies you the spirit both to will and to do of his good pleasure. But the opposite is also true. There is another spirit that can supply people both the will and the ability to do of its good pleasure. And so we know that that spirit has come to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And it can speak to people in government and use them to kill, to steal, and to destroy. And the bottom line is that we must find it in us to pay the necessary price, to use what we learned from the last class and from the class before it, to begin to mount up with wings like eagle. To get in the position where we can hear like Moses. We can go to the mountain and download templates. Like Noah, we can go to somewhere and download a template for building an ark. This ark called Nigeria that we are building, where did we download the template from? This ark that people are building called America, where did they download the templates from? Thank you, and may God prosper his word in our hearts. At this time, I will invite one or two persons to ask questions or make contributions before we call it a day.
Very, very good points that you brought up in terms of the where does the powers, what powers do the governors and presidents and politicians in general, what powers drive them and I guess inspire them to do the things that they do. And it's very important because if we're living, it's not just there, but here in America, you know, the people that are in power are tapping into a different source other than the source that's from the Most High. And we're all dealing with the consequences of their choices to tap into the wrong power. So, you know, the word says that when basically like when the nation rejoices when the godly is enrolled.
Yes.
When the wicked's enrolled, then the nation doesn't rejoice. So I know you said that it's not good to complain, but maybe take the complaining energy and do what you can to protest and to try to figure out what can be done to help change things and either make the people that are in power do what's right or get them out as soon as possible. So I didn't have any questions. I guess it's just some things that I was pondering on while you were speaking tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ross, and I appreciate your perspectives to some of these issues. And you're right, when the righteous is in authority, is in power, the people rejoice. Why do they rejoice? Because they hear God and they implement His counsel. If the unrighteous is in power, they won't hear God. Even if they hear Him, they won't implement His counsel. And they will hear another being and they will implement their counsel. And so they will multiply misery, they will multiply woes. And that's what you see happening around us today. And the goal is that at Boqer School, we are raising leaders here. Some of us from this class will eventually become people who impact their societies. I'm tired of having Christians whose only goal is to have a job, pay off their mortgages, have 2 kids, 7 grandkids, and die. No. We have to extend ourselves to get, even if it is in the tech space. You see the amount of incredible sacrifices our brothers from the other end are making just to download devices and implement. Today they are working so hard at you guys have heard about COVID passports, COVID ID. It's been discussed, and with speed, in less than 10, 11, 15 years, if guys not taking, they can implement that. And there are the researches about implanting chips in the hands, in the palm, in the wrists, and then on the forehead. And we know what that means. But people are working on it, researching it. You see the big boys, the Bill Gates of this world, all of them, and at that elite level, they have extended themselves, and today they are using their resources to shape the society. And those of us who are altruistic, those of us who understand these things, those of us who know that there is a higher being, and who know that He has His will that He wants to execute on earth, wants it small. So let your will be done in my house. But the other person is saying, let your will be done in the country. So when they go to bow to these spirits that inspire them, they want the will of that spirit to be done in the country. But you want the will of your own spirit to be done in your house. You see why we need to expand our capacity. And that's part of what we're doing here. That it's no longer time to complain. We have a more excellent spirit. There is a He that needs to be in someone before they can govern. But the He that is in us is greater than He that is in the world. Then how does that He that is in us, we find ways to circumscribe Him? And then the smaller He that is in the world is running amok, and we can't tame them. I do believe that part of why we're here is that some of us here will receive empowerment to let that light we have shine so brightly, to have that our salt the earth, that we can use our influences, our positions to make things better for people. And that's why we're here.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Mr. Goswell.
Good evening. Yeah, I just want to appreciate Chima for the incredible job that he is doing. I didn't join the class very early because I was just concluding as well from another activity before I came on. But from where I came on and the things I heard, it's really, really challenging and thought-provoking. The truth of the matter is that the views that we have shared here tonight is not very popular. You know, it's not what you would say people out there wants to hear. It's not the kind of thing they want to hear us talk about. People out there just want to challenge the current state of things. An eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But this is a place where God is opening our eyes to see that every power, that every government that we see in power has its source. It has driving force. These guys that we consider as bad people, corrupt leaders and all that, they recognize this and they don't joke with it. And it's just my prayer that God will help us, help believers, and other peoples of other nations, to get to realize that you don't just take power, because you want it. There is a power a higher power, a higher authority you must bow to. And, it's that authority that you bow to that determines what you do and how you do it. And for those of us who are crying out for a change, it begins with submitting to this higher authority, which is God, because when we are submitted to his authority, he gives us the capacity, and when we are full of that capacity, we are able to challenge the ills in our nation, and we get to see us winning. We get to see the kind of result which God intends for our dear nation. So I just want to appreciate Chima for what you're doing. And I also want to encourage each and every one of us. It's not easy. It's not something that, the change we're seeking for in our nation is not something that will come so easy, or would come automatic. But we have to start somewhere. We have to start somewhere, changing the mindset of the people. It's not just enough for us to have this kind of forum where we share truth, but I think it's down to each and every one of us to use every platform that we have to communicate this truth, to the hearts, minds of other people out there. This is something I believe that we have the responsibility of, and I pray that God would help us to do that. Thank you so much for this great opportunity to be part of this wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you, my dear brother, and then thank you for making it to this platform. I believe that there is something the Lord is doing in this period, and that he will utterly raise his men to achieve his purpose. Thank you so very much, my dear brother. I saw your question, Mr. Emmanuel Adile. So your question is, what can we do in the circumstances to control those who are influenced by contrary spirits? All right. So here we go again to spirits. All right. Spirits are domineering. Spirits like control. And in many of the instances, they like what they like. If it is the Holy Spirit, the way he regulates you is through your choice. He asks you to, nudges you to do, and you can choose to do. And if contrary spirits start out, they always start out nudging you to do, and you do. But eventually, they are not comfortable becoming passengers in your vehicle. They love to become conductors, and from conductors to drivers, and from drivers to owners of the vehicle. Right? So that's why some people who are substance abusers start out abusing, and then eventually the substance owns them completely. That is also the same thing with people who yield themselves to contrary spirits, that it may appear that they are in partnership with the spirit, but eventually, if it is contrary spirits, it will want to hold upper hands, and they drive. They are not like a gentle spirit that have you take your decisions. In many of the instances, they force. And so when you have people, for instance, let's use the idea of madmen. And I'm not saying that your politicians are mad. I'm just using a metaphor to answer your question. If somebody has a mental issue, or has been possessed by a spirit that has taken control of their mind. So that spirit is shouting into their ear, eat from the dustbin, and they eat from the dustbin. And you now take that person who eats from the dustbin and make the president, and you want to control him. Make sure that the chains you have are strong enough. But there are ways you can organize and mobilize, especially when you read what Jesus was telling the woman, not even the woman, he was using as a metaphor to tell us about governments in Luke chapter 18, where he says that in a certain city exist judges who neither fear God nor men. And we have discussed this, that in many of the instances you have presidents who neither fear God nor men. But Jesus says that the best way to extract things out of these people who neither fear God nor men is to weary them. And so we said that a judge that does not fear God is a terrible error. A president that does not fear God is a terrible error. A lawmaker that does not have the fear of God is a terrible error, because God leads by internal regulation. So that your president, after making a presidential decision, in the night something would thump his conscience and said, you did right. Or after taking decision, something would nudge his heart and say, you did not do right. But once you have successfully killed that thing that pricks the conscience, once you have successfully taken it out, my view is that the person will become a terrible president. But so when you have people who can no longer be regulated internally, then they don't fear God. So whatever God is telling them cannot be implemented because they don't fear him. And then why is this happening? It is happening because of the very nature of God. Ultimately, everything anyone does, all of them will have to be accounted for. But it is God who chooses the place and time of reckoning. So if he tells a president not to steal and the president steals, there will be reward. But the reward in many cases does not happen instantly. It does not happen instantly. It is God who chooses the place and time of reward. And you would want it to happen instantly, but sorry, that's not the way it works. Because even your own reward does not happen instantly. If you introspect your life today, just today, today alone, let's not go back to the week, just today alone, you've done some things that you require punishment from God. And so if he was going around slapping people as you lied, he slapped you. As you looked lustfully, another slap. As you did what you're not supposed to do, another slap. As you cursed that woman out at the traffic light, another slap. As you lied to someone you're trying to do business with, another. If God goes around dispensing immediate judgment, who will survive? And so in his wisdom and in his magnanimity, he has chosen to delay judgment to his own time. And so this president will disobey God. That disobedience will be punished, but may not be punished instantly. And therefore, God has left this president to you, because this president obviously does not fear God. So regardless of what God says, he will not do it. Then Jesus says in Luke chapter 18, that you now have to force that president to fear man. Because the president, though he does not fear God, but he fears man, because he's worried about, if I don't do this, the people will protest. If I don't do this, the people will picket me. If I don't do this, or if I do this. So Jesus says, lest by her continual coming she worries me. So yes, we can now organize in ways that can force the hands of those people who are possessed, according to you, or influenced by contrary spirits. But that is exerting a certain kind of energy. But the second part is also true, that we can aspire to replace them. If someone who is empowered by contrary spirits can exert himself to become the president, how much more someone who is empowered by godly spirits? If the God we call on is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he is also the God of David. Why is our God limited to only giving us house rent? The only thing we want from God is admission. The only thing we want from God is to pay off our mortgage, to buy a new house, to buy a car. And last 2 days was Sunday, and you go to church and you see Christians praying. What are they praying about? For themselves. But you see people who approach contrary spirits and they are asking for territories. Nations. That one man who is sick and old can be empowered so much so to take over a nation of 220 million people. And the people are asking for car, UBA job. I want to get a CBN job. I want to get a visa. To run away from a country that is yours. My friends, we can aim big and ask God for territories. We can ask for states. We can ask for territories. We can ask for local governments. Depending on our capacities and on our faith, we can grow our faith to ask for senatorial seats, to make laws, to download laws. Instead of running around with chains trying to help these metaphorical madmen, why can't we replace them? And I'm sensing that the Lord is beginning to do a quick work in Africa to raise his Davids so that these Goliaths will be brought down. As long as they stay there, people cannot achieve their highest given potential. That's why you see a lot of Nigerians in Nigeria feel circumscribed. But when they go out to some societies that allow them, they thrive. Because you have men and women who has conspired to keep the people down. That the conditions are not enough for people to live, let alone thrive. And so, Mr. Dile, it is now for you to begin to develop systems. Yes, systems. You see it, my dear sister is giving us an inspiration here. It says, it makes me think of Pharaoh and the 10 plagues that God himself had to send. 10 plagues, 10 pandemics, 10 COVID-19s, or even worse than that, to change the mind of Pharaoh. Because he will tell you with still small voice, you will not hear. He will scream, you will not hear. But when it comes to the will of the Lord, let me say this quickly, because a lot of people, I'll mention it in part and maybe leave it to another day that the inspiration will come. There are sovereign wills of the Lord that cannot be violated. Sovereign will, it cannot be violated. Sovereign will cannot be violated. No matter who you are, you cannot violate it. No matter how much you do, you cannot stop the sun from shining tomorrow. There are some things that are in the sovereign will. And so once you encroach into the sovereign will of God, you will be decimated. He can send plagues to you. He can send famine. In fact, in one of the instances, he sent one angel to kill 165,000 soldiers in one night. Sovereign will cannot be violated. But then there is also the will of God that is not sovereign. I can give you instances. It is the will of the Lord that you live a righteous life. But you and I know that you lied yesterday. So that one is not sovereign. You can violate it with consequences, of course. So when it comes to those sovereign that you cannot violate, you can't. You would destroy yourself trying to violate them. And it happens. But then when it comes to those other will, he leaves you to also exercise your own free will. And that is why some presidents can choose to partner with God and they can rout heavenly civilization. Some presidents can also decide to disobey God, and he will allow them because it is whatever we allow on earth that is allowed. If we bind it on earth, it will be bound. If we bind presidents on earth, presidents will be bound in heaven. If we bind economic policies here, it will be bound in heaven. So that quotation, that scripture is not just for demons alone. It's also the demons that run around in government houses. No, the things that run around in government houses are not demons. They are actually principalities and powers. Thank you so very much for attending this episode of Boqer School of Government. I do believe that this session was impactful, and we will continue to hold the conversation. Please follow our channels on YouTube, on Facebook. If you can, search for Boqer School of Government on your favorite podcast platform. So if you are on, okay, Apple Music for us it has to be set up. But then if you are on Google Podcast, if you are on Spotify, if you are on Boomplay, all of those things, you can search for Boqer School of Government to get the episodes of our programs. Then if you are on Telegram, you can just search for Boqer School of Government on Telegram. On YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, we are all on all of these platforms to make it easier for people to access these messages. And because we also know that there are people who may not have the patience to listen to the full lectures, we are also getting them bite-sized lectures, bite-sized bullet points in 1 minute video, 2 minutes video, 4 minute videos, and we post those things on our Facebook and YouTube channel. So subscribe to those channels so that you can get those, and then you can share with your friends, and then also try to share some of the things we are discussing here, whether they be our audio links, our video links. Try to share them with people and then say, can you listen to this, and then see what they make out of it, because that way they can also be equipped to take on their work, especially people who have this call of God around the society, around government, around leadership. We need to be thoroughly equipped. We need to know the kind of things we are fighting against, and we need to be thoroughly equipped so that when David shows up, he shows up fully prepared, and David is not standing before Goliath unprepared. Thank you so very much for coming. My name is Chima Christian. Africa's morning is at hand.